picture's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with kind of a weird review, kind of a notes toward a review, a collective review, a meandering set of reasons why I can't possibly do a review on Julian Barnes' The Sense of an Ending. This is going to be somewhat of a spoilery review. I am going to refer to events that happen well into the novel, but I am going to kind of dance around and not reveal the final big surprise. I'm going to talk about my reaction to it without naming it. So if you don't mind spoilers up until the very end where there's a huge surprise, I won't spoil that for you, okay? I did a buddy read of this with Leah from Hide and Seek, and we have a vlog available on both of our channels about that. I'm going to, so that you don't feel like you have to go and watch it, although I think you should, but just so you don't feel like you have to watch that 20-minute vlog, I'm going to, in a very brief way, regurgitate the progression of my reactions to the novel. I thought that the beginning of this novel, that was set in the high school days where there was all these very intellectual discussions about history, was a bit pedantic, and that none of the characters, with the possible exception of the new kid, Adrian, were fully embodied in that section, but I still found it fascinating. And then as soon as Tony enters university, he becomes a fully embodied character, and he gets a girlfriend, Veronica, and at that point I was totally seized by the narrative and just was having a whale of a good time. The scene with Tony and Veronica's mother when he goes back to Veronica's family for one overnight visit was just searingly fascinating, and I just couldn't get over how I was pulled deep into that scene, and I knew that it was a momentous scene, but of course I had no idea how. So this was a very propulsive novel. I couldn't stop turning the pages. I thought the writing was wonderful. I did always, throughout the novel, thought that the musings on history were a bit much, but still really interesting. Having a fictional character ruminate on how his life is like a novel and how history can be understood or cannot be understood without considering who the narrator of that history is. Most of that was really rich, but I thought just a bit pedantic. But then near the final third of the novel, I thought it went off the rails for quite a while and it became really boring. And I didn't find those philosophical musings, I found them irritating near the end and not so interesting. So then things got really fascinating again once Tony and Veronica came back into one another's lives through the will that Veronica's mother had left Adrian's diary to Tony, and then there's kind of a battle of wills between Veronica and Tony, which culminates in, and I'm not going to go into those details, where they actually have a couple meetings at the end, and it was riveting. On the very final page, or the penultimate page of this 150-page novel, there is a huge surprise which I didn't see coming, and which stopped me dead in my tracks. And I'm not going to say what it was. And so I ended the novel feeling just like, what the fuck? That's what Leah wrote on her final page, and yes, wow. So, for entertainment value and shock value and all of that, I was very... had to take a long exhale. I've been holding my breath for the last few pages. So, that was all very good. And within about 15 minutes of putting the novel down, I started feeling angry. And I started feeling like this was some kind of a fraud. I felt like Dorothy when she sees the wizard. She peeks behind the curtain. I just thought, what? No! That ending was not that. No! That's about as articulate as I've been able to get about my reaction to the ending. And I thought about postponing this review until I became more articulate. I did, in fact, consider rereading the novel this weekend before reviewing it. But I've decided not to do that, and to present my inarticulateness and my conflictedness about this novel as the sum total of my first reading. I think it would repay a second reading a little later, but not right now. I loved it and I hated it. I've given it 4 stars because it kept me so entertained and so riveted, and it was so thought-provoking and so beautifully written. but I kind of hated it too, especially that ending. And so when I step back from it, one of the questions that I have asked myself in my reading life over the years is, do straight white male writers have anything to say? And I think about the narrative acrobatics Julian Barnes went in this tale to stretch his character Tony to have some kind of an experience where he could feel some sort of compassion for a woman. And if those are the links that straight male characters or straight male writers have to go to tune in with other people who are not straight white men, it's kind of pathetic. But I loved it, most of it. But I'm so angry. So, that's about as far as I've gotten with my thinking. So, I'm going to bring in other voices because, and you, of course, you could go and check, or maybe you've already checked the comments section on my vlog. There's also another set of great comments on Leah's. It's the identical video, but it's on both of our channels. So there's a great set of comments, and I'm also going to share a wonderful review from online. So more about that at the end. So there's many great comments. Let me just talk about and quote briefly from a few of them. Liz Schubert, who has a channel here that I really like, said she's read this book many times and she loves it more each time she reads it, and she thinks there's not one unimportant word in the novel. So she was really happy to hear that I was going to be rereading it. She's alluded to several blogs that talk about the ending and do some analysis or some literary commentary on the ending or on the book. And so I asked her to paste those into the comment section, and I will put them in my show notes here. I have elected not to look at those. I'm just going to go with my reaction to the book, but if I, and I think I should, reread this, I will certainly check those out. So thank you again, Liz. Chris of Chris Bookish Cauldron also had a wonderful long comment, and he hated this book. This book made him so angry he threw it across the room. Someone whose channel I don't know, but I will be checking out. This was a comment on Leah's page. I think it's a channel. It's a YouTube ID. I presume there's a channel behind it, but I haven't checked that yet. I'm going to quote her in full. She says, "I disliked this book the first time I read it. Oddly, because I could not get the story out of my head, I reread it a few years later and loved it. I think the first time I was in a headspace where the book struck me as a long, male, ego memoir-style novel. The second time I read it completely differently." There's more to her quote. So that was really food for thought. And this goes back to what I've said many times, and it's not an original thought to me, that I think we are all reading different books when we read the same book. Leah's and my experience of the book was quite similar. I don't think she had the anger at the end that I did, but we both kind of felt like, probably this one isn't going to age well in our memory. She gave it 5 stars. But that comment made me think that I might have a completely different experience rereading this in a year or two. Jer's comments, he just completely related to my dipsy doodles through the novel. He said that I pretty much summed up his thoughts. He writes, "There were moments when I was ready to rate it 5 stars, but after finishing the novel I wasn't that sure anymore. It felt somewhat pretentious, almost too self-conscious about its own genius. However, I liked it. I liked it a lot, and still, over a year later, I keep thinking about it every now and then. I have a strong feeling the novel would benefit from a reread." So, yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I'm just torn. I loved it, and it made me crazy, and and so other BookTube luminaries who've loved it, Camel, of What Camel Reads, and Juan of Just One Reader, just loved it. Eric Carl Anderson loved it. I'm probably forgetting people. Many people loved it, but there's a sizable minority who didn't enjoy it or hated it or had big problems with it, and I'm kind of smack dab in the middle. I stumbled upon a review of The Sense of an Ending by BookTube's own Steve Donoghue. This is from his Open Letters Monthly in December 2011. It's short, and with his permission, I am going to read it to you in full. Just listen. This bored and boring pastiche of third-rate Updike starts nowhere particular, goes nowhere particular, and then just stops, perhaps unable to stand the weight of its own droning anymore. The thing is barely longer than a short story, and yet Barnes can't be bothered to weld the two pieces together in any kind of way. Instead, the main character, a blank template of the stock fictional author stand-in, doing the whole, "Gee, I'm not as young as I once was" shtick, bears no resemblance to the younger version we see in his memories. And those memories have no importance to the ginned-up, unexpected inheritance half-plot that comes wandering in like Brown's cows and hangs around until the author gets tired of it, or just plain tired, and drops it. The end of the book, as in the final page, since it gives us no other kind of ending, comes as a mercy and an indictment. If this is the kind of lazy, self-indulgent crap that gets book contracts from major publishing houses, there's something seriously wrong with the whole industry. I love that review. I didn't hate it that much, but some of the strongly negative reactions I have to this book that I'm not able to articulate, he has articulated. But that's his review. It doesn't completely express how I felt, but it's just a masterful takedown, so I had to share that with you all. So, there's been a wide variety of responses to this book. There is a wide variety of responses within this little brain. What do you think about a year down the road, a bunch of us do a reread buddy read? So you have to have read it at least once, and it would be great to have a divergence of opinions, people who hated it or loved it, and do a reread together and see if any of our reactions change. Doesn't matter if that doesn't happen, that's just an idea. But I want to reread it, but I want to have enough time to let it sit more and kind of forget about it and experience it new on the page. But I loved it, I hated it, what should I do? And that ending made me start humming.
Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all